I want to say thank you to our sponsors who've helped make this event possible. Neurotech Medical is our platinum sponsor and has been. Will and crew are here from Neurotech, and we're going to be hearing from Will later today before lunch. Our gold sponsor is MST, and their table's right here. We have 4 silver sponsors: Veltronic, Millennium Medical, Osipka, and Resonetics. Thank you for our silver sponsors. Our bronze sponsors this year: Microdual, Focus, Coforce, Neobionica, Resolution Medical, and Black Swan IP. Eugene from Black Swan regrets he will not be able to join us. He's in the process of becoming a new dad, so congratulations to him. But he sends his best, and if anyone is interested in information on accessing a biomedical engineer, patent attorney, Black Swan is worth talking to. So with that, I just want to say a couple of words about Neurotech Reports. This is our 25th year, not just for our conference, but for our publication, the Neurotech Business Report. And we launched a second publication called the Bioelectrics Business Report 5 years ago. And copies of the current issue of both of those newsletters are in your handouts. Again, your handouts are behind the paywall at that website that I just mentioned a moment ago. Other things we do: maintain a database of neuromodulation products. We do market research reports and white papers. We also have a consulting arm, and Jeremy Koff runs that. He's a very experienced neurotech consultant and really takes advantage of the expertise that he's gained and that Jojo and myself have gained over the years in covering this industry. So for startups, for strategics, for VCs, for government agencies who are looking at the neurotech market, we can help you out. And Heather, our industry liaison, can tell you more and arrange meetings if you're at all interested. So just quickly, our staff, myself, editor and publisher. Jeremy Koff is our senior consulting editor. You'll be hearing from him later today. Jojo Platt, I think everyone knows, is our senior contributing editor. Jojo has been in the industry for a long time and is involved in many things, as you probably know. Victor Peikoff is a contributing editor, and he, if anyone is reading our Bioelectrics Business Report, is a frequent contributor. And finally, Sharina Rice is here today, and she is another contributing editor for our publications. So with that, I would like to move into my first talk, which is really a talk I've been giving for 25 years. It's just on the state of the neurotechnology industry. There we go. So just want to start off with a little personal comment, if I could. Our keynote speaker today is Dr. Eddie Chang. He will be speaking after lunch in this room. But tomorrow, our keynote speaker is Tom Mortimer. And I'm really excited to have Tom here as our keynote tomorrow. I hope you all can be to be here. But it's really a pleasure to have him for a couple of reasons. Number one, many years ago, when I was an undergraduate at Case Western Reserve University, Tom was one of my favorite professors, ran the Applied Neural Control Lab, and I was fortunate enough to take a graduate level class with Tom, and really opened my eyes many years ago. Well, as it turned out, life brings changes, and early on, biomedical engineering was a new field, and there really weren't a lot of jobs for biomedical engineering graduates. And so I did what a lot of engineers do. They work in tech. So my first job was in aerospace with Hughes Aircraft Company. A few years after Howard Hughes had died. Now, that's an interesting story. I'll tell you maybe during the cocktail reception. It turned out that Hughes Aircraft Company was privately held by the Howard Hughes Medical Foundation. Howard Hughes hated the IRS, and so he, as a tax dodge, decided to donate all the shares of Hughes Aircraft Company to the medical foundation. Well, it took a while, but the IRS finally figured out that it was a tax dodge and broke the company up. And as a result of that, this is many years after Howard died, but the Howard Hughes Medical Foundation, which was really just a kind of a virtual entity, found itself with billions and billions of dollars that it received from General Motors, from Boeing. DirecTV is a spinoff of the Space and Communications Group, and now, of course, the Hughes Medical Foundation is one of the largest private funders of medical research. So Howard may be rolling over in his grave, but anyway, to finish the story, after working in aerospace for a few years, I got an opportunity to meet some of the pioneers in the area of electronic publishing, and the two gentlemen in particular by the name of Chuck Geschke and John Warnock. As it turned out, they were the founders of Adobe Systems. I got a chance to meet them very early on, and then decided, wow, this is an interesting industry, and started a publication in electronic publishing, which became a magazine publisher, and I sold back in late 90s, just before the dot-com crash. And of course, when I sold, I had a 5-year non-compete, and I decided, you know what, it's time to do something else anyway. Let's see what's going on in biomedical engineering. So I got on a plane and went back to Cleveland and met with Tom and Hunter. I think a lot of you know Hunter Peckham. And I said, I like to call it my Rip Van Winkle moment, because 20 years had gone by since I had graduated. And I said, what's been happening in neural engineering? And Tom said, well, quite a bit. He filled me in, introduced me to Warren Grill, who was a young assistant professor at the time. And then he went on to become our first senior technical editor for Neurotech Reports. He's now at Duke University and a major figure in the industry. But at any rate, and Tom and Hunter introduced me also to Jennifer French, who became one of our contributors, writing partner. And so it was a fateful trip to Cleveland. And so I want to say again, Tom, thank you for your role, not just as a teacher, but as a mentor in getting me back in this field 25 years ago. So I put together this little industry timeline. I want to talk about what's been happening in the current year, because that's generally what I do in this space. But before I do, I wanted to talk about just some of the key events that have happened in the industry since our launch in 2001. And of course, you can see there, Volume 1, Number 1, Neurotech Reports launched in 2001. And of course, yeah, there were some things that probably happened before 2001, but you know, I wasn't there. So we can only tell you about some of the key events. And a lot of these key events were really acquisitions. M&A tends to define key milestones in the industry. Of course, if you're an investor, you understand why. If you're a startup, you understand why, because that's where the money comes from. But it also helps to define what are the key categories, what are clinicians and patients interested in, where's the infrastructure going to be. And one of those first deals was Boston Scientific acquiring a company called Advanced Bionics. Interestingly enough, Jeremy Koff was working. Were you working in 2001 for Advanced Bionics? But anyway, Jeremy was there early on. He doesn't have quite as many gray hair as I do, but he goes back. He goes back a ways as well. Another deal that came along not long after that was St. Jude Medical, now Abbott, acquired a Texas firm called Advanced Neuromodulation Systems. These two deals were huge, not just because of the dollar amount, and the dollar amount even for 25 years ago was significant. These were billion-dollar deals or close to it, but also because they upended the competition. Medtronic had dominated this industry for years. They were the only player, or at least the only large public player in neuromodulation, and now all of a sudden, Boston Scientific and St. Jude Medical, competitors already to Medtronic in the cardiovascular space, now joined Medtronic in the neurospace, and it really helped to set the the timeline for the growth of the industry. Now, some other events occurred, and not all of them were positive, right? The industry has gone through some negative experience as well. And one of the biggest, well, actually two, were trial failures. North Star Neuroscience, a publicly held company, which had innovated a cortical stimulation therapy for treating stroke. As it turned out, they also had indications for treating depression and for treating tinnitus. All very promising. Unfortunately, they failed the pivotal trial. When they failed their pivotal trial for stroke, it brought the whole company down. And a company that had raised, well over $100 million before IPO, and once they became public, was valued at least a couple $100 million, vanished overnight. And I believe it was Certec that picked up the pieces. Will, you got a good deal on that. Will, I think you picked up the pieces for pennies on the dollar. Another failure just a couple years later was St. Jude Medical, which had sponsored one of the first depression trials, DBS for depression. Ironically, it wasn't so much a failure. It was really just not taking it out long enough. And so St. Jude pulled the plug on that trial because the preliminary 6-month data didn't look so good. And that, of course, these two trial failures really had an impact on the industry because for many years, for 10 years to come, nobody would touch DBS for depression. Nobody would touch cortical stimulation for stroke. Finally, the investors and the startups have come back, but those are two kind of sad transactions. Some other acquisitions took place, and a merger between Cyberonics and Sorin to create a company that's now known as LivaNova. They've been active initially in epilepsy, but have entered other markets, including the market for sleep apnea, and they will be one of the major competitors to Inspire Medical. NeuroPace, another company which has recently gone public, got approval for their epilepsy device. More recently, St. Jude Medical got swallowed up by Abbott. And now the big three in the neuromodulation industry are Abbott, Boston Scientific, and Medtronic. A couple of other events that stand out, things that we've covered in Neurotech Reports, but just wanted to mention these, as we talk about the 25 years of the neurotechnology industry. These are some of the events that we've been covering. Now let's talk about what about 2005, what's been happening? Well, a lot has been happening, and a lot just in the last few weeks. I'm sure most people here have heard about the Boston Scientific deal for Nalu Medical, valued at roughly $600 million for a company that was doing maybe $60 million in revenue, a privately held company. Nalu Medical is primarily a PNS, peripheral nerve stimulation company. And that acquisition really, again, sent a signal to the rest of the industry. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment. There was another deal earlier in the year. Globus Medical, a med tech vendor, primarily in the ortho-spine area, decided, well, let's get into neuromodulation. They picked up Nevro for $250 million. Now, that's a real irony, given that we saw Nalu go for $600 million, which is more than double what Nevro went for. Nevro at one point had a valuation, the public company had a valuation in the billions of dollars. To see the multiple versus the Nalu multiple tells you a lot about when a transaction occurs with a company on the upswing versus one on the downswing. So Jeremy Koff has written a really a great piece talking about the differences in valuation, and those of you who are subscribers to our publication may recall that piece when that transaction happened. Something that happened in January at the NANS meeting. I don't know how many people were at the NANS meeting in Las Vegas. I thought this was very significant. The NANS decided to not merge, but kind of have an agreement with other pain societies, including ASPEN, the American Society for Pain and Neuroscience, but also NASS, the North American Spinal Society. And this is significant because, you know, prior to this, there were really two different groups of clinicians, right? All treating back pain, but some people looking at pain from a neurological basis, and other people looking at it from a orthopedic standpoint. And so the various presidents of these organizations, Corey Hunter at the time was NAS president, Tim Deere was Aspen president, and they basically decided, look, let's not fight with each other. Let's have some détente, and let's try and do what's best for the patient. What a concept, Tom. Let's, you know, refer the patient to a neuromodulation specialist when the etiology, you know, shows that it's neuropathic pain. And if it's mechanical pain, well, then maybe we refer the payment. So this has been an issue really since day one in our industry, is who owns the patient, right? There was a company called Neurocontrol, spun off of Case Western Reserve University. Tom knows them well. Hunter was one of the founders. Had a pioneering therapy for quadriplegia, which worked well. The trouble was there, among others, there were battles among the clinicians. Who owns the patient? The PM&R, the neurologists, the neurosurgeons? And so this is an issue that, to this day, competitors in our industry have had to deal with. And will continue to. But we thought that that was kind of an interesting event. Also in 2025 was our first European Neurotech Leaders Forum in Belgium, in Leuven, Belgium. I'm pleased to tell you that our second annual Neurotech Leaders Forum Europe will take place at IMEC in Leuven in June 23rd and 24th. Hope y'all can make it. Certainly our European friends. Been a lot happening in the BCI space. China has made it almost a national priority to challenge the US leadership in this technology. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. And then we've seen because of, well, in part because of the change in administration, and in part just because, you know, there's not enough money. There have been some, you know, concerning issues on the reimbursement front. These are some of the major headlines of articles that we've published in Neurotech Business Report. Actually, that's the first article you can find in the current issue, and it's something, kind of our analysis of why this Boston NALU deal is meaningful for other players in the PNS market. And in fact, I think we have a few of those players here today. I think I saw Manfred here from Neuronoff, and Aiden is here from Nirvanic, I think. There's probably some others that I'm missing, but if you're in the PNS space and you see a deal like this go down, you get excited. So we talk about that in this article. So if you get a chance, download that issue, and you know, would love to hear your thoughts. But we've also offered analysis on the Nevro sale. Jeremy's article I thought was very insightful. Article about the pain societies uniting. An article about some of the competition in the BCI space. In terms of market activity in the last year, of course, we mentioned the NALU deal and the Nevro deal. Some smaller deals. Bioventus decided to divest its Bioness neuro rehab line. Now, they kept the PNS line, but the Ness Handmaster, anyone here from Bioness? We actually have an ex-Bioness person in Jeremy. He's been everywhere. But he knows more about that deal. electroCore acquired Quell, and I put acquired in quotes because they didn't spend any money. They just took the product over, which is the kind of deal that I like to do, you know, kind of a garage sale type of thing. Quell was the first DTC, direct-to-consumer neural modulation product. Now, DTC, you still have to have FDA approval, but you're able to distribute it through retail. So Shai Gazani, the founder of Quell, was actually showing this product at the CES, the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas, was selling it through Target and Best Buy. And, it turned out not quite so easy. So unfortunately, they have given the product over to electroCore, who is using it to pursue the fibromyalgia indication and not so much go after retail customers. Smaller company called Beacon Biosignals acquired CleveMed. Cleveland Medical has been around for many years in the neurosensing area. You may know Bob Schmidt. Bob Schmidt was the founder, and I think an ex-case person. Synaptica, which is a company in the Alzheimer's space, did a deal with NextStim, which is a European company marketing magnetic stimulation systems. I think that was interesting. And another magnetic stimulation company, Brainsway, invested in Neuroleaf. Neuroleaf is a company that was primarily pursuing non-invasive neuromodulation for treating headache pain. And guess what? Hey, well, maybe we should be looking at magnetic stim as an alternative modality. Been some key regulatory approvals in the last year. New Spiric Medical got approved for OAB, which puts them in competition with Medtronic and puts them in competition now with Boston Scientific after they acquired Axonics last year. SetPoint Medical, very significant. This is one of the first major FDA approvals in the bioelectronic medicine space for inflammatory disorders. We're actually going to hear from their CEO, Murthy Simhambhatla, tomorrow. Onward Medical, a European company in the spinal cord injury space, got approved for their external system. Neuros Medical is another one of those PNS companies, another spinoff from Cleveland. I think they're still, they're not in Ohio. They moved to California. Sorry, Tom, but they spun off from Cleveland, and they got approval for their pain product for treating amputation pain. Lots and lots of VC funding. These are just a few of the many transactions that happened in the last year. As you can see, many of them involving BCI companies. What's not on here is all the money that Elon Musk has brought in for Neuralink. It kind of is in a category by himself. We'll talk about that in a minute. But as you can see, even other indications like stroke, headache pain, restless leg, they're getting money. Investors are interested. However, I want to talk a little bit about the spinal cord stimulation industry. I mentioned the big three, Medtronic, Boston, and Abbott. Of course, there's now new players, and that new competition is making life a little bit more difficult. Of course, Nevro entered the space a few years ago and took some market share. The newer players are Biotronic, which is a German firm that's been very active in the cardiovascular space. They've been on the market now for a couple of years. We're going to hear from one of their executives tomorrow during Jeremy's session on pain. There's also Saluda, an Australian company that was the first to offer closed loop neuromodulation for treating back pain. So these upstarts have taken a few points of market share, but the other issues facing the industry have to do with reimbursement. So there's been a decision on prior authorization, which is not helpful. There have been some other, decisions that have made life a little bit more difficult for clinicians who want to implant SCS systems. And then, of course, the advent of PNS. So peripheral nerve stimulation is in many ways a simpler procedure. It's less expensive, can be done with office visits, and can deliver therapy directly to the source of the pain. And so, again, particularly with this Nello acquisition, it's really getting the world, I mean, clinicians and patients and investors more interested, more aware of how PNS can accomplish things that only SCS could do a few years ago. I want to read this comment from Sean Lee. Now, Sean Lee, as many of you know, is a pain physician who's been involved in leadership in the North American Neuromodulation Society, among others. He was at the Business of Pain meeting in Miami just a couple of weeks ago. Jeremy and I were there. And I want to read this comment because I think it really portends some of the troubles that the SCS industry is facing. In my view, the spinal cord stimulation market is at an inflection point. Unless we take deliberate action to protect and reform it, this field risks stagnation and potential collapse. We've already witnessed a major shift in public perception in markets like Australia. Similar sentiments beginning to surface here in the US. The SCS market is heavily inflated by industry-driven forces, and there is a growing disconnect between the insiders and the broader healthcare ecosystems. I'll skip ahead, but the bottom line, he says, is I believe the path forward lies in aligning reimbursement with outcomes rather than procedure volume. Only by demonstrating real-world durable value can we preserve both the integrity of our specialty and the viability of this transformative technology. So what I'm getting at here, and again, we're going to hear from Tom Mortimer tomorrow, who was, one of the inventors of the first spinal cord stimulation systems. And definitely that industry has grown. It's grown for good reasons. It's helped a lot of people who weren't being helped with chronic pain. On the other hand, there have been a lot of negative reports, some of it in journals, some of it in press reports, much of it using suspicious methods, and of course the industry has fought back, but the public perception is still there. And if Dr. Lee, who himself is an implanter and who himself is a supporter of the industry, makes a comment like this, I think that gives you an indication that the SCS industry has some troubles ahead. And in part, it's because of PNS. So this is from our recent market research report on implanted pain neuromodulation. You can see that the orange, which represents the SCS market, is still well ahead of the blue, which is the PNS market. But if you were to look at growth rates, you would see that PNS market is growing at rates in the 20s, 25, 30% CAGR versus low single digits or mid-single digits for SCS. This is our estimation of how much market share. This will be in, I'll make these slides available to everyone so you don't have to jot this down. But there are frontiers for pain neuromodulation besides chronic back pain, diabetic pain, migraine, neck and cervical pain. Curonics was, I think, the first PNS company to get approval for treating neck and cervical pain. Fibromyalgia, big area. Menstrual pain. There's some new developments in wearable electrotherapy. I already mentioned post-amputation pain. There's new technologies besides PNS, people looking at deep brain stimulation, people looking at magnetic stimulation, people looking at vibrational stimulation, focused ultrasound, and sensory stimulation. So here's an example. Jeremy wrote this piece a couple months ago looking at some of the players in the focused ultrasound market. Sanmai is one of the competitors, Highland Instrument. Of course, there's many others. Magnetic stimulation for pain. Neurolace Medical was one of the first to be FDA approved for that modality. This is a company called Harmonic Pain Solutions that's really exploring the science of vibrational or mechanical activation of pain fibers. Many of you have met Amy Baxter, the founder of the company. She was a speaker here a couple years back. Very promising indication. People using sensory stimulation. We're not using magnetic energy or electrical energy. We're just using light and sound to treat pain. It sounds kind of silly until you see some of the results we've seen in other indications. There's a lot of potential here in minimally invasive migraine devices. Two competitors, a European company called Salvia, an American company called Shiratronics, both using minimally implanted devices for treating migraine. I mentioned menstrual pain. There's a company called Samphire Neuroscience that has a non-invasive device called Nettle for treating menstrual pain. Marome Bixen, a professor at CCNY, many of you know Marome, very, very bright guy, has come up with this concept of wearable disposable electrotherapy, a very interesting application. There's the link to his paper if you're interested. I want to talk now about BCI. A lot has happened. I mentioned, the funding that's taken place. I want to just kind of give you my 2 cents worth of where the industry is heading. And right now you have a lot of players in the BCI market who are using implanted devices in the brain to restore some kind of function to people who are locked in. And that's great. What's already been accomplished by the 12 or so Neuralink patients, a handful of patients from some of the other companies, and of course the pioneer in this space, BlackRock Neurotech. I think Rob is here from, there you are, from BlackRock. Really the first commercial firm to be doing this and have more implanted users than any other firm. What they've accomplished is amazing, but let's be real. Whether it's a dozen, whether it's 100, whether it's 1,000, there's just not enough locked-in people that this application is going to support the kind of investment that's going on. On the other hand, there are other indications, and each of these indications, such as speech restoration, psychiatric applications, vision restoration, have tremendous appeal, and we're excited about that. We're going to hear from Eddie Chang later today, who's been a pioneer in speech restoration and also a pioneer in treating depression with DBS. Eddie has a startup company, which many of you have heard of, called Echo Neurotechnologies. Not quite sure how much he's going to talk about it, but it will be very interesting. I think those two applications are really exciting, and vision is a seriously unmet clinical need. The degrees of invasiveness, however, matter. Not everyone, even people who are severely handicapped, want to have brain surgery and have metal electrodes implanted in their brain. There are other approaches, though, and I mentioned 3 here: Subsense, Science, and Synchron. What's interesting about these 3 companies is that they're getting into the brain without having to drill a hole in your skull. And for a lot of people, maybe for good reason, maybe not for good reason, but a lot of people don't want to have holes drilled in their skull. And if you can deliver a neurotechnology device into the brain through the cerebral vasculature or through nanoparticles, we're going to hear from Tatiana, who is the CEO of a real promising firm called Subsense. And of course, Science Corp, which is using a biohybrid approach, using biological material to be the device, if you will. Very interesting approaches that I think set those 3 firms apart from the companies who are drilling holes and putting devices, putting metal into your brain. Now, of course, Precision will say, oh, well, we're minimally invasive. And it's true, right? There's degrees of invasiveness. I think this is going to be a key issue as we learn more about the long-term impact and also about the short-term perception that users have. The other comment I wanted to make is about the merger that I think is coming between DBS and BCI. If you look at closed loop DBS, which Medtronic, of course, is pushing other companies, well, NeuroPace was really one of the first to say, hey, look, we're looking for biomarkers, and then we're delivering stimulation based on what those biomarkers tell us. Now, if you listen to Elon Musk, what he says is, yeah, we're definitely implanting electrodes to read, to sense user intent, but we can also deliver stimulation. Well, what's that? That's closed loop, right? So I think this artificial distinction that exists today between BCI and DBS is going to go away. Now, what it's going to be called remains to be seen. BCI is a buzzword. Everybody's using it, even if you're not a brain device. It seems to be the key buzzword that helps you get funded. But I think in the long run, we're going to see a merger of BCI and DBS, and maybe it's just going to be called, I don't know, neurotech device, or maybe it's going to be called brain implants or neural implants. But whatever it's called, functionally, I think we're going to see merger. It's going to be the indications. What problem are you solving that's going to determine who wins and who loses? But it's also going to be non-technology factors like who owns the patient, right? So yes, the technology, the precision and Neuralink and some of the others are presenting very, very promising, but they don't have the installed sales force. They don't have the relationships with the neurosurgeons who are going to implant those devices. Who does? Well, Medtronic does, Abbott does, and Boston Scientific does, and a couple of European firms that are in this space. They have the relationships. So I think what you're going to see, you haven't seen it yet, but you will see Medtronic buying or merging or partnering with one or more of these BCI companies. I think we'll also see Boston and Abbott doing something similar. And what that's going to do is grant access to clinicians, to neurosurgeons, access to patients that they don't have. And of course, what Medtronic and Abbott and Boston will have access to is all this great new technology. Lastly, the non-invasive BCI market, completely different. It's really more along the consumer line, and we'll be talking about that later. This is my 2 cents worth, kind of summarizing. It's an editorial I wrote back in June. That's the link. You can download it or just get it off of the files. Lastly, I want to talk about money. Who's going to pay for all this stuff? Sad fact. Even if we didn't have a change in administration, the CMS can't afford to pay for everything. They just can't. And of course, right now we have a government that's shut down that can't pay for anything, hardly, even if it were fully operational. The current administration doesn't seem like they're all that excited about spending more money on healthcare. On the other hand, our technology offers a way to save taxpayers' money if we do the economic analysis. But the economic analysis that we do has to be specific. And what disturbs me a lot of times when we look at some pitch decks from startups, they talk about the cost to society or the economic burden, and that's all well and good. But guess what? It doesn't impact me. I'm not a salesman, but if I were, and I had something that's going to save you money, Jordy, I'm going to save you $1,000 if you buy my product for $100. I'm not a good salesman, but I think I could make that sale. On the other hand, if I go to Jordy and say, Jordy, if you buy this $100 product, it's going to save Jojo $1,000. You're not going to be all that motivated. And that's the whole problem with these economic burden arguments. We have to bring it down to reality. Who's paying that bill? Let's find out who's paying that bill and pass the savings on to them. Private insurers need motivation, and we need to put our money where our mouth is. So this is a plan, a scheme, if you want to call it, that we introduced back in 2019 with a law firm, Maynard Cooper, called Incentivizing MedTech Reimbursement. It's a scheme, and you can download this if you're interested, that motivates private insurers to help fund a lot of this new technology that CMS just can't. And basically, in a nutshell, the way it works is we will spiff you, the insurance company, if you will take some of that risk. Instead of relying on CMS to pay for everything, and of course it takes time to get that, even if we do get MCIT reinstated, which we might, could happen, but even then there's not enough money. But private insurers have a lot of money, and we can offer them a spiff. You do an economic trial, of this you fund this new technology and do it for 3, 4, 5 years. And if it works and saves you money, let's roll it out to CMS. And now we're saving the taxpayers money, and you, insurance company, you get a spiff. You're going to get a percentage of what the government saves. I think it's a win-win. But anyway, that's the plan. I want to close here with some noteworthy quotes that we've collected over the year. Here's one at the LSI meeting in Orange County. Tanya Dowd, who's works for Pariah Healthcare and is really an expert in reimbursement, talking about the AMA CPT code process. It's 90% politically charged and 10% politics. Tim Dennison, many of you know, former Medtronic person who's now in the UK at Oxford University. He gave a talk at NANS where he said, neurostimulation has always been closed loop. The trouble is you needed a human to close the loop. A lot of people nodded their heads when he said that. I had a chance to hear Paul Yock, who was the founder of the Stanford Biodesign program just recently at Stanford. He talked about the early days of that program. He was a professor, and there was a pushback against entrepreneurship if you were a professor. Other professors wanted him to take a vow of chastity, meaning, you shouldn't be in bed with these med tech companies. Well, of course, things have changed, but that was years ago. Ken Mariash is the CEO of Synaptica, was just recently speaking at the Device Talks West program in San Jose. He said firms that are marketing the amyloid beta are going after the quote unquote usual suspects. We need to do more than just clean up the ashes after the fire. And what he means there is, look, all this money we've been spending on the amyloid beta hypothesis, you know what? It's time to look for new therapies. And guess what? Neurotech offers some of those therapies. So just going to close here with some key topics in our upcoming sessions. Today, Navigating the Valley of Death will be next. Jeremy is going to moderate that. We have an investment session also. Jojo is going to moderate a session on AI-driven BCIs, a lot happening in that space. Jeremy will have a session about new realities at HHS and in the US government. Tomorrow, we've got some great sessions on pain, on bioelectronic medicine, on wearables, and finally, our closing chat tomorrow will be with Paul Grand. Many of you know, been very helpful. So with that, I'm going to close. Happy to take maybe 1 or 2 questions. I know we're a little behind, Jeremy. It won't come out of your budget. We'll give you more time. But time for maybe 1 or 2 questions if we have any. And it does not look like we have any. Okay, so thank you very much. Appreciate it.